Help me!" With a cruel laugh, classmates nudged the wheelchair toward the icy edge, their smiles sharp with a darkness no teenager should carry. For months they mocked her, called her useless, turned silence into a weapon. What they called a prank was about to become a tragedy. Just as the wheelchair began to slide toward the unseen drop, a German shepherd lunged forward, and a Navy SEAL came running from the shadows. In seconds, everything changed. What kind of hate pushes classmates this far? And how did one act of courage stop the fall? Subscribe and stay with us. You won't want to miss what happens next. Cold wind rolled in from Lake Superior, carrying iron-gray clouds over Duluth, Minnesota, sharpening the air and flattening sound until every footstep felt deliberate. Ryan Cole noticed the wind first because it tugged at old injuries the way memory tugged at conscience. At 35, he carried the disciplined weight of a U.S. Navy SEAL who had learned how to stand still even when everything inside him wanted to move. He was tall without being bulky, shoulders squared by years of kit and salt water, jaw cut clean and angular. A faint scar along the right cheekbone that caught the light when he turned. His hair was kept short and practical, dark brown with a premature dusting of gray at the temples, and a trimmed beard shadowed his mouth, not careless but restrained, like everything else about him. Ryan's eyes were the color of cold steel, alert without being loud. The eyes of a man who had once learned that hesitation cost lives. A shoulder injury had pulled him back to the mainland, a torn rotator cuff earned during a night extraction off the Pacific that left him with pain he pretended not to feel, and patience he was still learning to rebuild. At his heel walked Coda, a 4-year-old German shepherd whose sable coat shifted from coal-black along the spine to warm tan at the legs, muscles coiled beneath fur like a spring waiting for permission. Coda's ears stood sharp and expressive, one scar nicking the left edge from a training accident years earlier. His amber eyes were unnervingly intelligent, tracking motion, scent, and emotion with equal ease. Loyal without being needy, calm until he wasn't, trained to read Ryan's breathing the way other dogs read whistles. They had learned each other in places where trust was survival, and the bond lingered even here, on a public sidewalk beside a high school that smelled of wet leaves and teenage indifference. Ryan had come to Duluth for quiet, renting a small duplex near Chester Creek, telling himself he was here to heal. He told himself many things. Across the street, the glass doors of North Shore High slid open and released a tide of students wrapped in varsity jackets and laughter. Among them was Emily Parker, 16, pale-skinned, with a soft spray of freckles across her nose, her light brown hair braided neatly down one shoulder and secured with a blue ribbon that matched the rims of her wheelchair. She sat upright with practiced balance, hands steady on the push rims, posture learned the hard way. An accident 2 winters earlier, an icy run at Spirit Mountain that ended in a fractured spine, had taken her legs, but sharpened her awareness. Emily's face held a quiet intelligence, lips often pressed together as if choosing words carefully, gray-blue eyes observant and wary. She dressed simply, a thick sweater layered over thermal leggings, gloves tucked into her lap, her backpack hanging from the chair's handles with deliberate order. There was resilience in the way she moved, through space, but also a thin, invisible armor she wore against the daily calculus of stares, and whispered jokes. Waiting at the curb for her was Sarah Parker, Emily's mother, a woman in her early 40s, whose frame was tall and slender from long shifts and too little sleep. Sarah's hair was ash blonde, pulled into a low ponytail that had begun to silver at the roots, her skin fair and lined softly at the eyes in a way that spoke more of worry than age. She wore a navy nurse's jacket zipped to the chin, scrubs peeking beneath, and sensible boots scuffed from hospital corridors. Sarah's face held kindness without softness, a steadiness forged by night shifts and quiet emergencies, by learning to speak gently while carrying weight alone. Since her husband's death, an off-road crash on a winter highway that left questions frozen beneath snow, Sarah had learned to move forward without ceremony, protective without being smothering, her love expressed through consistency rather than words. She waved when she saw Emily, relief easing her shoulders as she crossed the street to help guide the chair over a cracked curb. Ryan watched the exchange without staring, the way he had learned to observe without intruding. Coda's ears flicked, nose lifting as Emily passed, the dog's tail giving a single, restrained sweep. Emily noticed anyway. She always noticed animals first. Her eyes met Coda's and something in her expression softened, a micro-smile she didn't share with people. Ryan felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came when he recognized a pattern he wished he didn't. He also noticed the boys loitering near the bike rack, Blake Harrison, broad-shouldered, blonde hair falling into careless waves, confidence worn like a varsity jacket too warm for the weather, and Tyler Nash, thinner, restless, eyes darting, laughter too quick. They weren't doing anything yet, that was the point. As Emily rolled past, Blake shifted just enough to block the sidewalk, grinning as if the world were an inside joke. "Careful," he said lightly, stepping aside at the last second, his foot tapping the chair's wheel hard enough to make it wobble. Tyler snorted. Emily steadied herself without comment, cheeks flushing, eyes forward. Sarah inhaled sharply, then let it out, choosing peace because peace was faster than confrontation. Ryan's jaw tightened. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Coda took one step forward and stopped, standing square, gaze locked. Not barking, not threatening, simply present. Blake's grin faltered for half a breath. Ryan made a note he would not forget. This place was not as quiet as he'd hoped. The wind off Superior cut again, and somewhere between the lake and the school doors, a line had been drawn. By the following afternoon the wind had eased, but the cold lingered, pressed flat against the brick walls of North Shore High like something waiting. Ryan Cole stood across the street again, hands buried in the pockets of his jacket, posture loose in a way that fooled no one who knew what readiness looked like. His shoulder throbbed dully, a reminder of limits he disliked acknowledging, but pain had never been the thing that made him hesitate. Coda sat at his left, spine straight, tail curled neatly along the pavement, the German shepherd's gaze moving in calm sweeps that mapped people into patterns of safe, uncertain, and wrong. Ryan hadn't planned on being here again. He told himself he was just walking Coda. That was another lie. Inside the school grounds, Emily Parker finished her last class of the day and waited for the hallway to thin. She had learned timing the way others learned shortcuts. Her wheelchair was a matte navy model with reinforced spokes, scuffed from use but meticulously clean, her hands moving with efficient familiarity. Today she wore a charcoal knit beanie pulled low over her braid, cheeks pale from the cold, eyes shadowed not by fear but by the mental rehearsal of routes and contingencies. Emily didn't believe in luck anymore. She believed in preparation, in noticing exits, in remembering who watched when no one else did. The incident from the day before had settled into her chest like a stone. Blake Harrison hadn't touched her hard enough to leave marks, but the intention had been there, unmistakable. The laughter afterward had been worse. Sarah Parker waited near the staff parking lot, leaning against her aging sedan, arms folded against the cold. Up close, the lines at the corners of her mouth were more apparent, carved by years of swallowed worry. She had changed out of her scrubs but still moved like a nurse, alert to imbalance, eyes scanning for hazards before Emily reached them. Sarah smiled when she saw her daughter, but it didn't reach her eyes. She had noticed the way Emily's shoulders tightened lately, the way silence stretched too long at dinner. Sarah had learned after her husband's death that danger often announced itself quietly. Blake Harrison appeared near the back steps with Tyler Nash and another boy Emily didn't recognize, a junior by the look of him. Thin and sharp-faced, hoodie pulled tight, curiosity outweighing caution. The new boy's name was Evan Miller, 18, lanky with a nervous energy that made his hands fidget constantly, eyes darting as if he were always waiting for permission to exist. He followed Blake because Blake filled space easily, because confidence was contagious even when it was rotten. Blake himself looked relaxed, blonde hair tucked under a wool cap, shoulders broad beneath his Letterman jacket, the easy smile of someone who had never been told no in a way that mattered. "Hey, Emily," Blake called, voice light, performative. "Your mom running late." "Again? We can help you down the slope." The slope he meant was the service ramp behind the gym, a long concrete decline designed for deliveries, not students. In winter, it collected ice in shallow sheets that refroze unevenly. Emily felt her pulse pick up. She knew that ramp. She avoided it for a reason. "I'm fine," she said evenly, angling her chair away. Blake stepped sideways, blocking her path with casual precision. Tyler laughed, too loudly, the sound sharp and hollow. Evan hesitated, glancing toward the main doors where teachers sometimes emerged, then back at Blake. "It's just a shortcut," Blake said. "Don't be dramatic." Ryan moved before he consciously decided to. He crossed the street at a diagonal, not running, not drawing attention, just closing distance. Coda rose smoothly and matched his pace, nails clicking softly. Ryan's face remained neutral, but something in his eyes had gone cold, the way it did when he identified a threat and stripped it of personality. Before Ryan reached them, the situation tipped. Tyler, grinning, placed a foot lightly against one wheel of Emily's chair as if to guide it, fingers brushing the brake lever. The click was soft, almost polite. Emily felt the resistance disappear. Gravity took over. The chair lurched forward, rolling faster than she could counter, concrete blurring beneath her hands as friction burned her palms. Her breath caught, a sound trapped somewhere between fear and fury. "Coda," Ryan said sharply. The German Shepherd launched forward, body low and powerful, teeth closing not on flesh but on the strap of Emily's backpack. The force was controlled, precise. Coda dug in, muscles straining, halting the chair's momentum inches from where ice glazed the ramp's center. Ryan was there a second later, gripping the chair's handles, boots braced, shoulders screaming as he absorbed the remaining force. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Blake's smile vanished. Tyler's face drained of color. Evan swore under his breath, backing away. "That's assault," Ryan said quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. He looked at Blake, really looked, the way men do when they are measuring consequences. "You don't get to call it a joke just because you plan to laugh." Sarah reached Emily then, hands shaking as she checked her daughter's face, her arms, the wheels. Emily nodded, swallowing hard, eyes bright but unbroken. She reached down and rested her fingers briefly against Coda's fur, grounding herself in the warmth and solidity of him. Blake recovered first. "She lost control," he said quickly. "We were helping." Ryan's mouth curved slightly, humorless. "Funny," he replied. "Because I watched your friend disengage the brake." A teacher's voice echoed from the doorway, asking what was going on. Blake stepped back, hands raised, already slipping into innocence. Tyler followed. Evan lingered a moment, guilt flickering across his narrow face, then fled. As the crowd dispersed, Ryan knelt beside Emily, careful to stay in her line of sight. "You okay?" She nodded once. "I will be." Ryan straightened, one hand resting on Coda's head. He had hoped Duluth would be a place to rest. Instead, it had given him a familiar choice. Snow came that night without ceremony, a thin, persistent fall that softened the streets and made every sound feel farther away, as if Duluth were holding its breath. Ryan Cole sat at the small kitchen table of his duplex, shoulder wrapped in a compression sleeve, ice melting slowly into a bowl beneath it. Coda lay at his feet, 4 years old, and tireless in spirit, even when still, sable fur rising and falling with a steady breath. The dog's head rested on his paws, ears flicking whenever a car passed, the faint scar along his left ear catching the kitchen light. Ryan replayed the afternoon in his mind, not with anger, but with the methodical calm that followed close calls. He didn't regret stepping in. He regretted how necessary it had been. Across town, Emily Parker sat in her room, the glow of a desk lamp tracing the edges of medical textbooks and sketch paper spread neatly before her. She had always drawn to quiet her thoughts, charcoal lines forming lakes and trees she remembered from before the accident. Tonight, the lines came out sharper. Her hands still stung where the cold had burned them against the wheels, but the pain felt secondary to the aftertaste of fear. Emily was 16 and already fluent in the mathematics of risk, in calculating how fast help could arrive versus how fast things could go wrong. The image that stayed with her wasn't the slope or the ice. It was the click of the brake disengaging, deliberate and small. Sarah Parker knocked softly and stepped inside. Tall and slender, her ash-blonde hair loosened from its ponytail, falling in tired waves around her shoulders. Without her jacket, she looked smaller, the lines at her eyes deeper, skin pale from winter and fluorescent hospital lights. She sat on the edge of Emily's bed and reached for her daughter's hands, examining the rawness with professional care. Sarah's voice stayed calm because panic never helped patients, and Emily was her patient tonight. "You don't have to go tomorrow," she said gently. "We can talk to the school. We can slow this down." Emily shook her head. "If I stop going," she replied, choosing each word, "they win without doing anything else." Sarah closed her eyes briefly, the old argument rising again, the one between protection and preparation. She had learned after her husband's death that shielding someone from the world did not teach the world to be kinder. "Then we do this the long way," she said, "together." The long way began the next morning with paperwork and uncomfortable meetings. The assistant principal, Mark Delaney, sat behind his desk with his hands folded, a man in his early 50s whose thinning hair and carefully trimmed mustache suggested a life built on moderation. Delaney was not cruel, he was cautious, a trait sharpened by years of balancing parental complaints against district policies. He listened as Sarah spoke, nodding, his eyes flicking occasionally to the clock. "We'll look into it," he said, the phrase smooth from overuse. "Teenagers make mistakes. We don't want to escalate unnecessarily." Ryan stood near the door, arms crossed, his presence an unspoken challenge. He said nothing until Delaney finished. Then he stepped forward, voice even. "You already escalated it by ignoring a pattern," he said. "Yesterday wasn't an accident. It was a test." Delaney's mouth tightened. He glanced at Emily, at the faint tremor in her hands, at the raw skin on her palms. "We'll increase supervision," he offered. "That's not accountability," Ryan replied. After the meeting, as they left the office, Emily felt the familiar weight settle again, the sense of being heard but not believed. In the hallway, Evan Miller hovered near the lockers, hoodie sleeves pulled over his hands, dark hair falling into his eyes. He looked thinner up close, cheekbones sharp, skin pale, the anxious energy of someone who lived at the edges of groups. "Emily," he said quietly, flinching when Ryan turned toward him. "I didn't know he was going to mess with the brakes." Emily studied him. She saw fear there, but also relief at being seen. "You laughed," she said. Evan swallowed. "I know, I shouldn't have." Ryan stepped back, giving them space. He recognized the moment for what it was. Not absolution, not justice, but a crack in the wall. "If you want to help," Ryan said to Evan, "you remember what you see, all of it." Evan nodded, shoulders sagging, as if a burden had been named. That afternoon, Blake Harrison made good on his silence. He didn't approach Emily. He didn't need to. Rumors traveled instead, whispers of complaints exaggerated, of that seal guy overreacting, of Emily being dramatic. The story bent itself to fit the comfort of those telling it. Tyler Nash laughed louder than usual, a brittle sound. Ryan walked Emily to the bus line, Coda pacing calmly at his side. A group of younger students stared openly at the dog, awe cutting through fear. Coda ignored them, eyes on Emily, tail relaxed. When the bus doors hissed open, the driver, a broad-shouldered woman with iron-gray hair, named Carol Jensen, lowered the ramp with deliberate care. Carol met Emily's eyes and nodded once, a silent promise of watchfulness. As the bus pulled away, Ryan felt the familiar pull to do more than was permitted. He understood now that this wasn't a single confrontation. It was a campaign built on attrition. He also understood that Emily had already been fighting it alone for too long. That evening, Ryan made a decision he had avoided since leaving active duty. He began documenting everything. Dates, times, names. Coda lifted his head as Ryan typed, tail thumping once in quiet approval. Outside, the snow kept falling, laying a clean surface over old tracks, never erasing what lay beneath. The week bent toward Friday, with a brittle tension that even the snow couldn't soften, and Duluth felt narrower, its streets funneling people toward decisions they pretended not to see. Ryan Cole sensed it, the way he sensed weather shifts at sea, small changes in posture, a sudden quiet where noise should be. His documentation had grown methodical. Screenshots, timestamps, witness names. He kept it clean, factual the way reports were written, when emotion only blurred the truth. Coda stayed close during those evenings, 4 years old and fully grown, his sable coat thickening for winter, paws steady on the hardwood as if guarding a perimeter no one else could see. Ryan's shoulder protested when he leaned too long over the laptop, a dull ache that reminded him of the night he'd been hauled from cold water under tracer fire, a moment that had stripped his patience for excuses. Emily Parker felt the narrowing too. She moved through North Shore High with a careful neutrality, her wheelchair gliding along routes she'd memorized, her face composed in a way that hid the effort it took not to flinch at laughter behind her. Today she wore a forest green jacket zipped to her chin, her braid tucked into a wool collar, freckles faint against winter-pale skin. Her eyes tracked reflections in glass, the angle of lockers, the way Blake Harrison and Tyler Nash occupied space without touching it. Blake's confidence had turned surgical. He smiled only when teachers were near, withdrew when they weren't, leaving his work to rumor and suggestion. Tyler followed him with jittery devotion, thin frame hunched, eyes too bright. At lunch, Evan Miller approached Emily's table, shoulders tight beneath his hoodie. Evan looked younger than 18 when he was nervous, dark hair falling into his eyes, fingers whirring a frayed sleeve. "They're planning something after school," he said quickly, barely above a whisper. "By the old footbridge in Leicester Park. Blake said there aren't cameras." Evan's voice shook, but his gaze held. Guilt had sharpened him. Emily didn't ask how he knew. She believed him. She nodded once. "Thank you." Sarah Parker heard the plan an hour later, standing in the school office with her nurse's jacket folded over one arm, posture tall but coiled, ash-blonde hair pinned back tight. Her skin looked almost translucent under the fluorescence, veins faint at the wrists where IVs had once been taped to her husband's arm. "We cancel everything," she said immediately, the protective instinct flaring hot and bright. Ryan met her eyes, steady. "We don't cancel," he said. We control." He had already texted the local non-emergency line and a disability advocacy liaison he'd contacted earlier in the week. He wasn't asking for permission anymore. The footbridge in Leicester Park was older than it looked. Wooden planks bowed with age, railings patched and repatched. Snow had been shoveled into uneven berms along the path, leaving a narrow channel where ice glazed the grain. Dusk settled early, the sky bruised purple, wind combing the pines. Ryan arrived first and walked the perimeter with Coda, mapping angles, checking footing, noting where sound carried. Coda's ears pivoted constantly, nose lifting, cataloging scents, wet wood, metal, adrenaline. Emily came next with Sarah, Carol Jensen's bus idling at the curb longer than usual, the iron gray-haired driver watching until they were safely inside the park entrance. Carol's broad shoulders squared beneath her coat, jaw set. She'd seen enough to know when to linger. Blake arrived with Tyler and two younger boys who stayed back, their faces pale and uncertain. Blake looked immaculate even in the cold. Letterman jacket brushed clean, blonde hair tucked beneath a cap, hands loose at his sides. He spread his arms as if welcoming an audience. "We just wanted to show Emily the view," he said lightly. "No stairs, accessible." Ryan stepped out from behind a tree, Coda at heel. Blake's smile froze for half a beat. "Back away from the bridge," Ryan said calmly. Tyler laughed. "Brittle. You can't tell us where to stand." Blake nodded toward Emily. "You okay?" he asked her, the question sharp with mock concern. Emily rolled forward an inch and stopped, her hands resting on the rims. Her voice was steady. "I'm not going onto the bridge." Blake's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, just enough to crowd the space. His hand brushed the railing, which shifted loose. The sound, a small wooden groan, was unmistakable. Tyler's eyes widened. "Coda," Ryan said softly. The German shepherd moved between Blake and the chair, body low, head up, teeth bared not in threat, but in warning. Coda's presence changed the air. The younger boys retreated instinctively. Blake's breath hitched. From the path, a flashlight beam cut through dusk. Officer Laura Benton approached, mid-30s, athletic build beneath a winter coat, dark hair pulled into a practical bun, eyes alert and unsentimental. She took in the scene in seconds, the loose railing, the ice, the spacing of bodies. "Evening," she said evenly. "We've had reports of unsafe conditions." Blake opened his mouth. Ryan spoke first. "The railing's compromised," he said, "and there's been an attempt to force a wheelchair onto it." Officer Benton knelt, tested the rail. It shifted again. She straightened, gaze cool. "Everyone steps back, now." Blake complied, face flushed. Tyler looked like he might bolt. As Benton radioed for parks maintenance, Evan emerged from the trees, hands visible, phone held out. "I recorded them talking about this," he said, voice thin but clear, "about there being no cameras." The wind rose, scattering snow across the bridge. Emily exhaled, the tension easing by degrees. Ryan rested a hand on Coda's head, feeling the steady warmth beneath fur. The long way had led them here, to a place without cameras that had finally found witnesses. Morning broke clear and brittle over Duluth, the kind of winter sunlight that didn't promise warmth but offered honesty, illuminating everything it touched. The fallout from Lester Park moved faster than rumor ever had. By the time Ryan Cole walked Coda past North Shore High, the wooden bridge was cordoned off with bright tape, maintenance trucks idling like repentant animals. Coda trotted at Ryan's side, 4 years old and composed, sable coat gleaming against the snow, his tail swaying with an ease that suggested a job well done. Ryan's shoulders still ached, but the pain had softened into something manageable, like a reminder that endurance could coexist with relief. He had slept better than he had in weeks, not because the world was safe, but because it had finally chosen witnesses. Inside the school, the air had shifted. Teachers lingered in hallways. The assistant principal spoke less and listened more. Emily Parker noticed the change the way she noticed everything else, subtle, precise. She rolled through the front doors with her hands steady on the rims, navy chair humming softly, braid tucked into a knitted scarf her mother had made the night before. Emily's face was pale but open, gray-blue eyes alert without the tightness she'd worn for months. She stopped at her locker and breathed, counting to 3, then opened it. No whispers followed, no laughter. just the ordinary scrape of metal and the thud of books. Sarah Parker waited in the office for a meeting she had demanded rather than requested. She stood tall in a charcoal coat, slender frame squared by resolve, ash-blonde hair pinned neatly back, her fair skin flushed from the cold. There were new lines at the corners of her mouth, but they were lines of decision now, not dread. When Officer Laura Benton entered with a clipboard under her arm, Sarah met her with a nod that carried gratitude without debt. Benton, dark-haired, athletic, eyes clear, laid out the facts without embellishment, the compromised railing, the witness recording, the pattern of behavior. The words reckless endangerment landed heavily in the room. Blake Harrison's parents arrived next, polished and pale, confidence fraying at the edges. Blake himself sat rigidly, blonde hair combed too carefully, jaw clenched, the easy smile nowhere to be found. Tyler Nash avoided everyone's eyes, thin shoulders hunched, hands trembling when asked to speak. Evan Miller stood at the back, lanky and quiet. Hoodie sleeves pushed up, phone clasped like a lifeline. When he spoke, his voice shook once and then steadied. He told the truth, all of it. The school's response followed procedure at last. Consequences were issued, supervision protocols changed. A safety committee formed with parents, staff, and students, Emily included at her own request. Sarah squeezed her daughter's shoulder when Emily volunteered, pride warming her face. That afternoon, a small gathering formed near the lake, not a celebration, but a release. Carol Jensen parked her bus and joined them, iron gray hair catching the light, broad shoulders relaxed for once. She brought hot cocoa in a thermos and poured it with ceremonial care. Officer Benton stopped by briefly, offering a nod to Ryan and a smile to Emily. "You did good," she said simply. Ryan knelt to adjust Coda's harness, fingers brushing the worn leather that had seen worse places than this. Coda leaned into the touch, amber eyes soft, then sat beside Emily's chair with deliberate closeness, a quiet sentinel turned friend. Emily reached down and rested her hand on his neck, feeling the warmth beneath thick fur, the steady pulse of life that had intervened when it mattered. "Are you scared it'll start again?" Ryan asked her, not as a test, but as an invitation. Emily considered the lake, the way ice fractured light into 1,000 honest angles. "I'm not scared of being seen anymore," she said. "That feels new." Ryan smiled, the expression gentle and unguarded. He had spent years believing safety was something you enforced. Duluth had reminded him that safety could also be built. Weeks passed, snow softened. The bridge reopened with new rails bolted firm. North Shore High hosted an assembly that didn't ask Emily to perform courage, but invited everyone else to practice it. Evan helped set up chairs. Tyler attended counseling quietly. Blake transferred schools before spring. On a bright Saturday, Sarah organized a small volunteer day along the lakeshore path, patching cracks, repainting ramps, clearing ice. She moved among people with an ease she hadn't felt since before loss, her laughter light, her hands busy. Emily rolled alongside her, calling out instructions, her voice carrying. Ryan showed up with tools and stayed. Coda supervised, occasionally stealing a glove and trotting off like a mythological trickster until laughter chased him back. As the sun dipped, the wind eased. Emily wheeled to the overlook and stopped. The lake stretched wide and blue, honest as it had been all winter. Ryan stood a respectful distance away, hands in pockets, letting the moment belong to her. "Thank you," Emily said, not turning. "For what?" "For choosing the long way," she replied. Ryan nodded. The long way had taught him something he'd forgotten, that hope didn't need rescue. It needed room. At the end of this story, the miracle was not that someone arrived in time, but that hearts chose to stand where silence used to live. Sometimes God does not send thunder or fire. Sometimes he sends a steady hand, a loyal dog, a stranger who refuses to look away. In everyday life, miracles often wear ordinary faces: neighbors who speak up, teachers who listen, parents who protect, and courage that rises quietly when fear expects surrender. If you are watching this and feel small, unseen, or pushed to the edge, remember this: God sees you even when the crowd does not, and He is still writing hope into places that feel forgotten. And if you are someone with strength today, perhaps God is asking you to be the miracle for someone else, to pause, to help, to stand between harm and the vulnerable. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment about where you are watching from or who you are praying for, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling stories that remind us no soul is meant to be left behind. May God bless you and your loved ones, protect your steps, and fill your days with quiet miracles.